Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our session today. I hope you've been enjoying the summit so far. My name is Amina Patton. I'm a Senior Academic Partnership Manager here at Corero, and I am so excited to welcome you to our session, AI by Your Side, Boosting Engagement and Productivity with Corero's AI Study Tools. We hope this session will inspire you and that we'll be able to share some great ideas today. I'm also going to be joined by Dr. Sandra Guzman Foster, an Associate Professor of Education at the University of Incarnate Word. Before we get started, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Next slide. That we'll be taking questions and comments in the chat as well as the Q&A function, but I want to remind everyone that if you need them, you can turn on captions by clicking the Show Captions button that you see here at the bottom of Zoom on the slide that I'm showing you now. So before we jump in to Sandy's section, I want to kind of ground us in what we're going to be talking about today. So let's take a moment to highlight the chat tool, which is the tool, the feature that we're focusing on from Corero today. And we've been developing this to enhance learning experiences for students. So as you can see on the slide here, the chat window opens next to the document that you're viewing and is there to offer you a multitude of features that we'll dig into in our presentation today. The responses are sourced from answers from real expert tutors, large language models, and materials from Corero's library of over 100 million study resources. So you can kind of think of it as a personal teaching assistant. Next slide. At Corero, it is important to us to bring the voices of educators into the process of how our tools are developed. So with this in mind, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Sandra Guzman Foster to join me on the stage to walk us through how she has experimented with this feature with her students. Well, as I mentioned before, she's an Associate Professor of Education and the Director of Center for Teaching and Learning at the University of Incarnate Word in San Antonio. So with that, I'll hand it over to Sandy.
Thank you, Amina. I'm so happy to be here. I am so excited to share with you what I learned from this amazing tool. Next slide, please. And just like Amina said, as a personal assistant, I like to think of it as a digital assistant. It provides so many features that are very helpful, which we're going to cover in this presentation. So some of the things that I experimented with when I thought and considered myself as a faculty member in my faculty role was how can this tool help streamline my lesson planning and preparation? And that includes like activities in the classroom, small group activities, projects, you name it. And how can that also help enhance my students' learning experience? Because to me, that's the most important piece about teaching in a classroom is what are my students getting out of what I'm teaching? And so how is Corero's chat helping me helping me do that? And then how do I engage my students? As we know, we've been hearing that, coming back from the pandemic has been a little bit challenging for some of us to engage our students. This tool does wonderful things about helping you, give you some ideas of how you can engage your students. So let's jump in and talk about what I learned. Next slide. So what I did was I uploaded a document that I had in Corero called My Ethical Self. It's an essay. And that's one thing I want to share that makes this very different from other tools is that you use what you already have. And then if you think about it, many of us have so many tools in our toolbox that we've used many, many times over the years of teaching. And so we know that every year our students change. The dynamics of our classrooms change. So even pulling up a document that you used 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and working with it is what makes this tool fabulous because it gives you these new ideas, these new features that you can actually use. So what I asked it to do, I took that document, and it's an essay assignment that I have my students complete in their capstone course, and I asked the tool to create a lesson plan based on the assignment for a 2-hour and 45-minute face-to-face, an online class, and a hybrid course to include small group interactive activities for each format. I did that because I not only teach face-to-face, but we do also have online courses as well as hybrid courses. And it did this wonderful, it just spit out this wonderful output of what I can do for each format. Then also I learned and experiment with research support. As a faculty member, we are encouraged to do research in our areas, in our discipline. And I stuck in an actual document that I had in one of my graduate courses. And by the way, I teach both undergraduate and graduate. I stuck in a project that I did with one of my graduate courses, and I asked it to help me create a research project for the specific topic that was on that document. And then also, I asked it to create slides. And the thing about this wonderful tool is that it gives you ideas of an outline to use for your presentation slides. So those of us who use PowerPoint or any other kind of presentation slide tool to share content in our classroom, it does a great job of giving an outline. It also gives you it gives you great ideas of what visuals to use on your PowerPoint slides. So I know sometimes we kind of struggle to think of what we can put on our slides instead of just words, make it more engaging, exciting, hooking our learners. This actually gives you some ideas of what visuals to use. And then also develop an assessment, and we'll talk about that too as we move forward. I asked the tool to help me develop some assessment tools based on the document that I pulled up in Course Hero. And if you look at my prompt that I used here, I said, what kind of formative assessment could I use prior to this assignment? And it did a wonderful job of giving me great ideas of what I can do before I give the students the assignment. So I can check for understanding, kind of see where my students are, engage where they are before I give them the assignment. Next slide, please. So another great thing that I learned, and I had my students actually use this. I had a couple of students use the tool to help them study, learn, and other things. This was really exciting for me, and it was exciting for the students as well. We hear students using other AI tools for classroom assignments and those kinds of things, but I wanted to go a little bit further. And so I asked my students to really think about it as if they were speaking to an assistant right next to them and to ask the tool questions. So for example, getting study guidance. One of the things that I asked the students to say, pretend you're talking to me or pretend you're talking to someone else and ask them how they can help, study for whatever it is that they're getting ready to study for. And this is exactly what they did. Can you give me materials to study the topics you suggested? So one of the first things they did was ask, you know, what can I do to prepare for my final exam? It was a document that we pulled up from Course Hero, and it gave a really great output. It gave some information, some suggestions, and the student decided to ask more follow-up questions. And then another one was, what can you tell me about how well I did in my writing, right? So we do hear there's a lot of resistance about how we can use AI tools for our students and when they're doing writing assignments. But there are ways where you can use it in a way where you actually try to help the students process what to do and how to write a really great piece of work, right? So it's not just about what they're producing, but what was the process they used to get to that final project? And so I wanted my students to use this tool to kind of help them. So one of the first things one of my students did was ask to provide feedback on an essay they had already written. And if they're addressing enough that the prompt was requesting and how it related to them personally, right? Because I wanted them to, like I said, kind of see the tool as an assistant or even a peer tutor sitting right next to them. And if you can see right here, the output, the tool did kind of produce, what's important to include in your essay, what would be beneficial to help them improve it, and what they should add more, what they should include more of to make the essay much, much stronger. The student was very surprised, pleasantly surprised, because it was as if they were speaking to a peer tutor or someone helping them give them feedback right there, quick, fast about the essay they just actually produced. It also helps clarify key concepts. One of the students asked a question about how it does ethics. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back. Clarify what the essay was asking about a certain question on the essay, on the prompt. I'm sorry. And it actually clarified what that meant on the prompt. And then also mastering skills. We talked about, they asked if they can get help. I need help in writing a thesis statement. What can I do to help me improve my writing of thesis statements when I do write essays? And then also refining work, which is the engagement piece. They continue to interact with the tool, and the tool produced great suggestions and recommendations to help them refine their work. Remember, the key was, and in my view, I wanted the student to actually interact, engage, so that way they can refine their work. And so I was able to actually observe the process that they went through to get to where they needed to get to before they wrote the final assignment. Next, please. So here we go. Another thing that this tool does, it produces really great resource for the classroom. I was really amazed at what it could do. I asked it to create student activities. I asked it to help me write discussion questions. For like example, we were going to be sending a topic that day. And again, I used a document from Coursera, and I'm going to stick to the one I talked about was ethics, how I view my ethical self. What kind of questions? And I didn't just ask what kind of questions. I was very specific. Can you give me higher order thinking questions? Because I really want my students to become critical thinkers as they're working through my classroom, right? We explored related topics. How does ethics relate to the real world right now? Because as we know, it's really important to bring in information from the real world. So students will say, why am I learning this? Why is this important? Well, it does impact what happens in the real world and what your place is in the real world. And then developing case studies, right? I'm a huge proponent of case studies. I use case studies because I think it puts students in the place of people. You know, they can actually feel what someone is feeling when they're in a case study. They can experience what someone's experienced. So that kind of experiential learning piece. So it helped produce case studies of ethical dilemmas that were very familiar to what young people experience today in the world. And so they were able to put themselves in those people's shoes to understand how to be an ethical person. And then collaboration. Again, that interaction and engagement with the tool was really outstanding because the students were able to collaborate with the tool. Even questions like, why does this matter? Why do I have to be an ethical person? And the tool was able to produce some really great information of why it's important. And of course, critical thinking, right? You don't want just them to regurgitate information. You want them to really critically analyze and think about what they're writing and what they're doing in your courses. And this tool really helps them do that because when they ask a question and the tool produces an output, they're able to take that information and think at a deeper level and then ask follow-up questions. So the idea is to help your students become that kind of person when they continue to question what is being posted in the output and what is being produced so they can produce the essay that you hope that they will produce. And not only just produce that essay, but was a process of learning during that interaction and collaboration to produce that final project. Next, please. So this is one of the things that is really critical and very, very important is that we acknowledge inside the use of AI. As a faculty member, I will tell my students when I have actually used AI to help me come up with ideas. Now, again, the tool is a great starting place, a great digital assistant. It produces outputs. You can fix it, customize it, tweak it, whatever best fits your student population or whatever is happening that day in your classroom. But it's important to acknowledge the use of AI. I also have found a really great disclosure statement, and we'll be sharing that with you in a few minutes, where a faculty member who shared what she uses with her students, where the students will produce these kinds of comments about how they used AI. And again, if you look at this, again, it's the process, right? What did they do with AI to help them refine their work and produce whatever it is you ask them to produce? Because you want them to be able to see it as a tool, not as something that's going to do the work for them, right? That's one of the fears that I hear from faculty as a director is that they're this fear. But if you show them how to use a tool, and that's exactly what I did when I asked my students to use it, and they loved it. It was fabulous, and they really liked the interaction and collaboration they can do with the tool. Next, please. So what we did, thank you to Course Hero, we decided to create this toolkit. And what this toolkit has is all the information that I experimented with. It shows you what I experienced with it and what kind of outputs came out of it, what kind of products came out of it. And then it also shows what my students did as part of the experiment. It's a great tool. I hope that you utilize it. I think you will be very happy with the tool as much as I was happy. At least that's what I'm hoping. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Sandy. And I'm sure we're going to have more questions coming in as people start looking at your ebook and just kind of taking in all the information you just shared. Next slide, please. So I'm curious for our audience here, are there any ideas that you kind of think of how you would imagine using a tool like this, using a chat feature like this in your class? So feel free to drop your answers in the chat. I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about that. And again, the link is in the chat to the ebook if you want to take a peek at that now. And we will also be sharing these resources from this presentation, and you'll have the recording as well. And Darcy, exactly, since you're not familiar yet, that's why we're here, so everyone can get ideas.
Oh, look at the filmmaking. That's great too. Pre-production.
Mhm. Oh, revising assignments, I like that idea. So for more for the teachers instead of thinking about what the students might do. Nice, yes. We all know the struggle sometimes of making our PowerPoint slides.
Yes,
Anywhere
exactly.
we can get help for that is
Yeah.
good. Brainstorming, yeah, ideation, coming up with ideas. That's really interesting, Sarah. So trying to think of different ways to give feedback. Self-guided study for the sciences. Awesome. We hear self-guided study a lot as something from faculty and from students. Brainstorming coming up again. This is fantastic. I knew there would be some really great ideas coming from faculty. I am from a from a family of teachers, and so I'm constantly inspired by what ideas faculty come up with, because it seems to be endless when it comes to generating ideas. And it's one of the reasons why I'm really passionate about the work that I get to do here at Coursera. One of those things is being able to do research. So I conduct research with faculty and students with connection to Coursera. And we're always looking to bring faculty into the development of our tools. And so Sandy wasn't the only faculty member that was experimenting with our chat feature, actually. I recently just wrapped up a study where we had 25 faculty members, and through all of their different classes, it amounted to about 375 students participating with the tool, experimenting similarly to what Sandy described, that they were given an assignment. It was a little bit different. They were given an assignment they were able to revise and customize to the needs of their discipline, because as we all know, it's a little bit different depending on which area you teach. And then they were asked to think about how they could use the tool, then experiment with it, and then bring their experimentations into class for a discussion. And so from that and kind of collecting all of the notes, we noticed some common themes that are coming up in a lot of the suggestions that we're seeing here in the chat. Brainstorming came up a lot. So trying to think of new ideas and different ways of ideating when you're at the beginning of a project or a paper and you're just kind of stuck and need a way to kind of get out of that. Proofreading. So being able to use it for editing and trying to find ways that you can potentially revise something that you're working on. And revision suggestions. And this example here, this is a quote from a student, that this is a segment of this quote. I thought it kind of encapsulated everything that we're talking about in terms of how they could potentially use the chat. And this is from someone who is working on their thesis. So I use the chat for a variety of editing and revision operations, including summarizing content, restating certain points, and checking grammar, punctuation, spelling, and overall language. Additionally, I used it to get additional perspectives and ideas I need for my paper. Not only did I use the easily accessible functions on the Coursera website, like summarizing and rewriting, I also took the initiative to ask it my own questions in the chat and had a more active communication with it. So very similar to what Sandy described with her students and how they were engaging with the chat feature as well. So practical feedback like this is really invaluable to us to ensure that the needs of our faculty and our students are really getting met by what we developed. And it's why we recently established the product advisory community. So with this group of educators, we will regularly conduct research of all kinds to give space for their voices to be heard. So at this point, we have nearly 200 teachers across high school and higher education that are currently influencing how Coursera creates meaningful learning experiences for millions of students. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in participating in, I'm going to drop the link in the chat for you to be able to sign up.
And Amelia, we have a question. It said, did you explain to students how the tool worked and any limitations? Yes, I did. I made sure that I walked them through it. I modeled it for them, and then they kind of did their own thing afterwards. And yes, we talked about make sure you check what the output is, make sure there's no hallucinations, make sure it's something that you can understand. So yes, absolutely, we had to explain, at least I did explain to my students how it worked and any limitations.
Absolutely. And similarly with the study that we mentioned before, in the assignment sheet they were provided, it gave them kind of a step-by-step process of what to do in terms of how to use the tool. And then we gave them some scenarios of typical things that they could try, but we wanted it to be pretty open so that the teachers could customize it to their needs and that the students had room to kind of explore and see what they find, so that they were able to experiment. I think that question that we just got about the toolkit, that ebook is widely available. I will drop the link to it in the chat again so that you're able to review it. And then you can go to the next slide. And we've already started.
Yes, we have.
We can hop in with questions. So I see one, do you cite and reference AI when you use it as a resource in your course designer in student work? Sandy?
Yes, I do. I do cite it because I think it's important that we model ethical behavior for our students. And that's one of the things that I do. I mean, I do explain that I use it as a digital assistant, but I do cite it when I use it. Absolutely.
How do you use AI to do Zoom-based interactive curriculum? So if you're dealing with asynchronous,
Yeah.
How would you approach that?
So that's one of the things that I asked it to do when I asked it to do lesson planning and activities. What design or give me some ideas for face-to-face, asynchronous, and synchronous. And it did. So what it did, it would spit out each kind of activity, what it looked like in a face-to-face environment, what it would look like in an online synchronous, and what it would look like with an asynchronous. And then, so what I did was I also asked it to do virtual, right? Zoom. So what if I was to use Zoom or Teams? Some people use Teams for their instruction. It did the same thing. It went specifically everything from what to do in a breakout room, what kind of questions to ask. So that's the thing is when you do the prompts, you got to be really specific, as specific as possible, and it will give you some ideas. That's what makes this a great tool.
Awesome. How can we evaluate how these uses of AI benefit the students? For example, perhaps there are unintended consequences from using AI for summarizing that could harm student learning. I can repeat that if you need me. I know it's a two-parter. So how can we evaluate how these uses of AI benefit students?
I think that one of the things that we need to do is just to make sure that you get student feedback, but also look at the quality of work they're producing, right? And the whole idea of having them acknowledge that they've used AI and how they used AI is also key because you want to make sure that they are not using AI to do the work for them. Instead, they're using AI to help refine their work or clarify something in the assignment. That's the key. I think also that one of the things that we have to one of the great things about this tool is I see it also as a tool where it provides equity, right? So what we're seeing in some areas, and I'm hearing from certain faculty, is that we have students who are able to pay for services that are really, unique and different, where students who don't have access to this kind of tool or cannot pay for those extra bells and whistles services are not producing the same kind of material. So again, it's something like this where you actually pull up a document from Coursera. I believe it does provide equity for our students in our classrooms.
So this question came up that I think is interesting because I also heard about this from faculty that are interviewed around writing and using AI tools. So do your students still do peer review of each other's works in addition to using an AI tool like this? So how would you balance peer review with students and then using a tool like this for feedback?
So after the students worked with this tool to actually refine their essays and get a final product and their final version, we did do peer reviews. And together we created a rubric on what that would look like, what kind of writing, good writing would look like after they received the prompt for whatever the prompt was about. And so they also made sure they looked for things that they knew were authentic from the student voice, if that makes sense. So one of the things that you do, at least in my classroom, is we make sure that we have lots of opportunities to interact with each other so they can get to know each other, get to know how they think, how they, what their lives are like. And so it comes out in their writing. And so students, that's the reason why we collaborate together and created a rubric on what that looks like. And so, yes, they use AI to refine, clarify, make it all beautiful, but the peers are the ones that really come down to it and can actually evaluate the work and whether or not they feel or give them feedback on how they can make it even better. So even with AI, it's not the end all be all, right? It's their peers and what they have to provide is really what matters to the students.
Thanks. I'm also seeing some questions come in about citing of AI tools. So was there a particular method? I know you mentioned the disclosure statements, but is there
Mhm.
any other way you talk to your students about how they would cite how they use a particular AI tool?
There are some I would say resources. I just like right now, for some reason, I can't think of the resource right now, but I actually have them go to a place where they can show or you cite how to cite AI. Um, and that's what my students use. But I also model it for them, and I also produce like how to cite AI on I guess, a document that I share with the students at the very beginning of class. So I share ways to cite, and in my discipline, it's APA. So I know there's different ways to cite for MLA and Chicago. So those kinds of things I also try to include because I know in other classes they may be using other kinds of formatting for their work.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, so I see, how do you limit the use of other Gen AI tools, or do you?
So again, that's what's really great about the Course Hero is that it uses your documents. And so even if you were to upload your document in ChatGPT, I found it to be a little bit different because at least with the Course Hero chat, it really does focus on your assignment and whatever document you pulled up. So when that's how I limit my students from using other AI tools and instead just focus on the Course Hero one.
And thank you, Morgan, for dropping that link in the chat. So anyone that has questions about
Oh,
citing
yes.
of AI tools, we have a great resource that we put together there to kind of help with all the different ways to kind of accurately cite. And then the AI disclosure statement. So those, if we can go back a couple of slides, we can put that back up on the screen. Another one more, another one, another one.
And I believe it's in the toolkit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'll drop that link one more time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I did not create that. I borrowed it. It's a wonderful statement. It's really pretty clear, and I think it's great. And yeah,
Okay, I see another question. Is Coursera integrated into an LMS like Canvas? Not currently. So this will be something you can link to directly, but there isn't currently an API to attach to an LMS. And I'm curious, Sandy, do you have any plans for how since we're kind of thinking about the fall, it's a little early, we're kind of starting to think about it. Are there any ways you're thinking about using this in the fall or for any kind of your upcoming classes?
yes. So I am going to use it more this time, because again, I had just been, this is new, and I loved it because I learned how to use it towards the end of the spring semester. But yeah, I'm planning to help use it as a digital assistant, just like I said, give me some ideas of some activities I can use. And again, the prompts very specific. Like for example, if I'm teaching a first year seminar, I'm gonna put that in my prompt. How could I, use a case study for my first year seminar on whatever, whether it's, ethical use of technology, for example, a topic. But if I pull up my assignment that I have an idea of that I'm going to use, this is how I'm going to use it to help me really even refine my own work, right? As an instructor or faculty member, is how can I refine this so that way I know that I'm meeting my students' needs, their learning needs, especially first year students who are very different than my graduate students. So it's one of those things that it helps me kind of distinguish between the two. I mean, I know the difference, but at the same time, I may be thinking in the back of my head, oh, I've done this with my graduate students, but I know I have to think a little bit differently when I'm working with first year students and undergrad students.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's see. Let's take a couple questions on the Q&A. So what kind of transparency is provided for the source materials provided by this tool? Can teachers see what students were given by the tool?
Yes, if you ask them to show you. I was standing right behind my students when they were doing it. I mean, if you really wanted to, you can ask them to cut and paste and show you, but yeah, you can see it.
Have you used AI to create games?
I have used AI I actually use this one to create role-playing games. We were talking about, I think it was financial literacy in a first year experience course, and we did role-playing games. So yeah, it can do that for you. Again, it just depends on how specific you are with your prompt.
Let's see, other questions here. I think you've addressed already around citing. And is there, in your knowledge, is there an AI tool that evaluates student mastery, or how would you use a tool like this to evaluate a student's mastery of a concept?
So one of the things that another document that I use that I teach a class called the Compassionate Researcher with my graduate students. And so one of the things we talk about is how do you become a compassionate researcher? So what I did was I had the students create an action plan, and I put up the template in Course Hero, and it's available. And I had the students really dig deep about what it means to be like, how can I be emotionally prepared to enter a community that may look different from me that I've never been exposed to, right? Or how can I make sure I check myself if I'm frustrated because don't understand what a person, from a different community that I've never been exposed to. So when the students were asking those kinds of questions and they were actually reflecting and completing these action plans, that's how I could see mastery, because it wasn't just a response from what AI produced, what the tool produced, but it was more like, oh, okay, I get it. When I'm frustrated, these are the kinds of things I can do. I am fearful. I'm scared because I've never been exposed to this group. It doesn't mean that, I'm going to do my best to make sure I'm emotionally ready and compassionate with people who are different from me. So that's how I did it. It takes a little bit of time, but to me, it's worth it because before they go out into the field, you want to make sure they're prepared, right? And so that's what I do when I do the mastery.
Nice. So we have a question, how can you be sure a student has used AI if they don't cite it? So how do you go about addressing this with your students?
So that's one of the things, it's a rule, right? You have on the syllabus that they have to cite AI if they're using it, and that's part of that disclosure statement as well. So if they're not using it, but if I feel like they have used it, I will ask them privately in question, did you use it? And most of the time, in fact, there was one case where a student said they just forgot. And so I'm provided grace, and I asked them to go back and cite it, and they did. So yeah, it's one of those things you don't want to police your students, but at the same time, you want them to be ethical about it.
So we talked a lot about prompting and how you engage with the chat, what you ask it, and how important that is to what you receive in terms of output. So how did you talk to your students and teach them about prompt writing?
So one of the things I said was just ask him a question, right? That's the first thing we did. And so the question was very, very open, very not as specific, right? And when they received the response, they were like, well, that didn't really answer my question. So that was what I said. I said, okay, what is exactly that you wanted them to answer? So then they became more specific. So that's how I teach them. And I also model it like out loud. Like if they ask me a question, I just answered it as open as I could. But then when they say, oh, you didn't answer my question, I'm like, well, what is it that you want me to answer? And then they got more specific. So even that role playing with them kind of helped them understand what a good question looks like, right? I've also had them, I help them understand how to ask really good critical questions instead of just lower level questions, because I want them to get that deeper learning impact. And that's exactly how they did it. So they learn, it's a process. They've got to learn how to ask these prompts, but eventually they'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, oh, thanks, Mike, for dropping that in the chat. Um, Mike Kins is another one of our speakers today, so definitely join his session if you have time. Let me see, I'm going through some more questions we got come in.
For grading, do you use ChatGPT for grading? If so, why and how? That I have not tried to do that yet. I will say this though, I did use it for discussion posts. When I had students post, I actually asked the tool to help me respond to it. And so what I did was respond to this prompt, right? I entered or respond to this post. I cut and pasted to the post, and it produced a response, but I made sure that it was a response that I would be happy with. I didn't copy and paste it back to the student, but it helped me think of ways to respond to the student. It doesn't take it away from it because I mean, I respond to my questions anyway, but I wanted to see what this tool could do. And it actually did a pretty good job. Again, digital assistant, I'm telling you.
In experimenting with AI, what are some uses that you think are not great for student learning? Can you share some of the lessons that you learned?
Um, I think that one of the things that I think that's not really good is to tell them to do the work. Do not do not help, allude to the fact that AI is there to do the work for students, right? You want to be specific and clear that it is an assistant, it is a digital tool. Um, what I do really try to share with my students is I need to see them in their work, right? So that humanistic piece that where we humanize the work, that is key. And when you explain that and share that with students, I think they start to understand that, especially like I said, when I use it, I model how I use it. I've actually showed them on the big screen how I use it. I go through the process of how I take the information and I use it as a starting point. It's never my finishing point. It helps me think of other ideas, and especially when I'm dealing with certain classes that are very different from each other, right? Um, but yeah, it's just you don't want them to use it as a tool or a crutch that this is going to do the work for me. That's the part that I think is what we're all fearing. But I also believe that we have to teach our students how to use this tool ethically, because right now we don't know what the future stands for and what our jobs are going to be like. And I think it's a disservice if we don't teach them how to use it ethically, because then that sets them already behind the starting line. At least that's what I'm thinking is why we need to talk about how tools like this can help our students versus harm them, but help them in a way where they become critical thinkers, right? Compassionate, hum, have good for humanity and those kinds of things. You don't want to take any of that away from learning. I don't know if that answered.
Is there any fear that AI would one day replace teachers?
No, I don't. I mean, that's the biggest fear I think people are saying, but I don't think so. You still need the human piece in there. You need the human interaction. You need that engagement. Um, I don't see AI helping my students reflect on something that happened in the field for research, for example. They're out there doing a study on, I don't know, the immigrants crossing the border. I don't see how AI would be able to specifically produce something about what they're doing in the field, especially when it comes to collecting data. So there's that humanistic piece you still need, even in your writing. I make sure that the prompts do require that they share something about their own experiences, which AI tools don't know about my experiences. So I don't think it'll ever take the place. I think we have to always remember that that humanistic piece is key as well. And it humanizes the learning process.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm curious, how do you see this kind of evolving over the next few years, kind of the role of AI in education and how it impacts kind of relationship between teacher and student?
I think that it will produce more relationships because what you're going to have, what I think what you're going to see, and what I saw happening with me is my students realized that it was okay to ask for help. So this digital assistant was that help, right? So many times students don't have time to go to the tutoring center or don't have time because they're working or doing something else. So the fact that they have this tool right there, I think will help them become better students. And I think in turn, that'll help the relationships between professor and student also improve because they're going to start to see the value of each other, right? And what they can do and what happens when you use and get help. And again, there's nothing wrong with asking for help. If I ask the tool to help me create a lesson plan, I'm very happy because it gives me a starting point, right? Also makes me a better professor, a better faculty member, because there may be something I didn't consider. And then it gives me an idea that also will maybe make me think of another idea. And then I become more creative, become more engaging, hooking all my students in. And that to me is important because, again, I mentioned at the very beginning, we all have tools in our toolbox that we've used for however many years we've been teaching. Things are different now. So how can I take that old tool that I've used and make it where it's more relevant for today? And I think that's what this tool is going to help us with. So we're going to have better teaching and better learning in our classrooms.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sandy. I think we God says, oh, wait, hold on one second. Is AI disclosure statement mentioned in the slides included in the toolkit? I believe it is, yes.
Mhm.
And this session has been recorded. It will be available, so you'll be able to revisit. So we'll have plenty of things to share with everyone. The recordings will go out in about a week after the event, so you'll have plenty of time to go over and review this again. I'm going to drop the link to the amazing ebook that Sandy worked on putting together for this session in the chat again, just in case. You should be able to download that. And again, if you're interested in engaging in any of the research that I mentioned earlier, that if you want to sign up for that, there's the link to sign up for the product advisory community. We want to hear your voices in the development of these tools as we continue working. And one more slide for me. If you have any other questions or anything that come up from this session, feel free to reach out to us. Our email is educators@CourseHero. You'll be able to get in touch with myself and the rest of my team. Thank you so much for joining today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit.